Hello, and welcome to part 2 of the titrating acetic acid video. This part 2 of the video is about the report, and the report works a little bit differently. So rather than handwritten sheets, you're going to be typing up a report this time. And so there's this report template, and you'll find it on the lab section, the labs page of Canvas, so right near where you find the procedure, in fact. And so you want to do, when it comes time to complete this, and this is going to be due after the lab, so you don't need to bring this to lab. This is to be completed after you finish the lab. And so you want to open this document up in Word and start out by putting your name. Very important, because I'm sure the teacher would love to give you points. After you put in your name, you want to put in the lab time and day. So I put John Doe as the name, but of course you want to put your own name for lab day and time. Let's say Friday, 9:30 a.m. And you would, of course, put your own lab time and own lab day there, rather than the sort of imaginary what I put here. You also want to insert that molarity of sodium hydroxide that we mentioned in the previous video that's so important. And so I'm just going to make up a number here. The number from lab will probably be different than this one. Let's say it's 1.397 moles per liter is the molarity of our sodium hydroxide. And let's say we have our volume of acetic acid. Well, let's say hypothetically we used a 25.00, so 25 milliliter volumetric pipette. And so if we use a 25 milliliter volumetric pipette, that's pretty trustworthy to a hundredths place. So again, for a volumetric pipette, please report to 2 decimal places or to the hundredths place. And so you just go through anything in sort of with the numbers, you're going to be inserting a value, typing a value, and anything in green is where you're actually going to be inserting an object. So in this case, it's going to be a data table. Before we make our data table, let's create a title for our table here. So I'm going to switch to black ink here. So table 1. And let's call this individual acetic acid titration data. So we've given it a title, and again, it doesn't have to be a creative title, but we want the reader to know what they're looking at. And so now we can insert our table. So how the heck do we do that in Word? It's actually real easy. We go up to Insert, and we're going to put in a table. So we click on Insert Table, and then we can just sort of drag right here how many rows and columns we want. So we're going to want, I think we're going to want 5 columns, and we want 9 rows, because we're going to hypothetically have 7 data trials we got through in those 2 hours. It only lets you go up to 8 here. So how do we get more than 8? Well, simple way to do that. If we just right click on the table, any one of these places, and then we go to, after we right click, Insert, Insert Rows. So we could do above or below, it doesn't matter. Bam, there we go. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to sort of do an edit here and show you the next steps of filling this out. So I'm going to go ahead and edit to save time and complete some of the table for us. Boop, 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 boop. All right, I've magically entered in a bunch of data really fast. And so here we've added our data right here. So we have our initial and final burette volumes, our volume of sodium hydroxide added, and we've also inserted molarities for the acetic acid for some of these. How do we find the molarity of the acetic acid? Well, it talks about that in the lab handout, also in the textbook. It's a stoichiometry calculation. We have to use our volume of NaOH added in conjunction with our molarity of NaOH, in conjunction with our balanced equation, and in conjunction with the volume of acetic acid in order to calculate that. And it's not a terribly hard calculation, but it's spelled out in that lab handout. So take a look at that. And anywho here, what we see is, I want to draw your attention to this 11.85 value right here. So that one to me seems much higher. So most of our values agree pretty well, right around this 11.1 to 11.15. And we have 2 outliers here. So we're going to toss out these outliers. And so when you want to toss these out, use the strike through option in Word. So if we go click on the Home tab right here, and then we click on the strike through one, sort of 2/3 of the way over on the left here, bam, we can strike that through and we'll indicate that we're not using that one. That's an outlier. And then we're going to do the same thing with this 16.14. That one's way off, so who knows what happened there. So let's go ahead and bam, toss this one out too with the strike through. Doosh, there we go. So we've indicated those are both outliers. We're not going to use them. So now we have right here 5 nice data points that agree with each other to within 0.05. And I've calculated molarities for those. And so what we're going to want to do is report our mean with the standard deviation of our volume of NaOH added. And we want to report our mean with standard deviation of our molarity of acetic acid. And we're going to do that in Excel here momentarily. So you can do it in your calculator, but I recommend Excel because it's going to be easier when you get to the big data pool for the class data. But let's go ahead and actually I like to block out these cells right here. So let's go to borders and shading. So I right-clicked on these cells right here, and I selected borders and shading. And we can actually do some shading here. I'm going to pick a gray color. So let's just do this 20% gray maybe. Boom. And we'll still gray those out to show that we're not using them. That's optional. You don't have to do it, but I like it. I think it looks nice and clean. And so let's talk about calculating our standard deviation, our mean. So I'm going to minimize this a bit, slide it over, and then right here I have Excel pulled up. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. And I want to make sure it comes through on the video here. So let's make it nice and big so hopefully you can see it okay. So I've just typed my data into Excel. So right here I have my volumes of sodium hydroxide added. And right over here I have my molarity. So it's just that data, the right 2 columns from the table that we were looking at just a moment ago. And so if we want to find the mean, the way we do that is we click on the cell right here, down below, and I've even put a little label next to it of mean. And so you're going to have to type all this stuff into Excel, and we're going to hit enter equals. And once we click on the cell, hit equals, and we're going to start typing average. And the average command comes up here. So I'm going to double click the average right here. So bam, double click average. And then it wants me to select the data. So I'm going to click and drag down and select those 5 volumes, hit enter, and bam, it gives me the average right there. So I'm going to do the same thing over here with these molarities. So I'm going to click on that cell, equals, and start typing average till the command comes up. Double click average, and then I am going to click and drag, hit enter. And so there's my mean molarity. So let's calculate our standard deviation now. So we have these right here. So click on the cell right here, equal, start typing STD. So STD like standard, STD, and we have a couple of standard deviation options. We want the standard deviation .s right here. So second one down, STD dev.s. So double click on that, click and drag, hit enter, and there we go. Same thing here, equals std, select the standard deviation s, double click it, click and drag once more, hit return. Okay, so there are our standard deviations and our means. So alright, so now in our table here, we're going to want to report our mean with our standard deviation. So our mean right here for the for this sodium hydroxide added is going to be 11.12. And so remember, we want to report, and let's do it, go ahead and hit the insert tab here, symbol, and there's our plus or minus right there. And then our standard deviation is 0.02. So we want to report our standard deviation to 1 digit, one non-zero digit, and then we want to sort of have that decimal place match, decimal position match how many digits we report our mean to. So it's those rules that were discussed in the Lab 1. So make sure that you look at that Lab 1 handout and check out those rules there for means and standard deviations. We're going to do the same thing over here for our molarity of our acetic acid. So our mean right here from our Excel spreadsheet is 0.1271. And then we're going to insert our symbol, that plus or minus again, equals, or excuse me, a space, and then 0.0002 is our standard deviation right there. So we've now reported our mean and our standard deviation using the correct rules for that. Alright, so what we have left to do now is to report our molarity calculated from our mean. So we're actually going to calculate our molarity of our acetic acid a couple different ways. We're going to take all our data points and calculate our molarities, then average those. But then we're also going to calculate our molarity of our acetic acid by using this mean volume added right here. So we're essentially going to calculate that two different ways. And so you want to put in right there your molarity of your acetic acid calculated from this mean volume of sodium hydroxide added. That would go right there. And it should agree pretty well. So this value and this value should match pretty closely. So the one in the table and the one you report here should be pretty close, or maybe even match the same amount, although you're calculating them slightly different ways, so you might end up with a slight variation right there. And then right here, you want to answer the question, if we look at our percent difference, does the value reported right here, calculated from our mean volume of sodium hydroxide, match this mean that we calculated over here? So look at the percent difference. Do they match? Do they not match? If they're off, how far are they off? And so right here, you're going to want to make sure you insert sample calculations as well. So you're going to put your sample calculations. The way you do that is you go to hit the Insert tab up here, Insert Equation, and you end up with the Word Equation Editor. And rather than me trying to explain this, it's probably best that you play around with it. With a few minutes of playing, you can probably figure it out pretty well, but things that are going to be helpful here are if you want to put in ratios like for unit cancellations, this fraction feature is really useful. So bam, we could put a conversion factor in there, like 1 mole of so-and-so over 2 moles of that stuff, and so on. And we can actually really easily set up an equation right here. And so that's the equation editor, a very handy piece of software. And you're going to want to do that for both the volume of NaOH added, which is just a simple subtraction problem, as well as the molarity of the acetic acid, which can be a more complex stoichiometry problem. So again, if you go to Insert, Equation, just play with it for a few minutes, you'll probably figure it out. And there's also some tutorials online about that. And then finally, the last thing you need to fill out here is you want to put in your mean volume of sodium hydroxide for the class and the molarity of acetic acid that you calculated from this mean. So I would highly recommend that you use Excel for the class data. So you're going to have a big old pool of class data. There's going to be, let's say 20 people times 5. We're going to have like 100 data points. So we're going to have about 100 data points right here that you're going to be plugging in. And so you're definitely going to want to let Excel calculate that mean and calculate that standard deviation for you. So you'll be reporting stuff similar right here to what you did in the sort of bottom right of the table. So that's the report. Hopefully that's not too confusing. Trying something a little new here. And we'll see how it goes. And if there's questions, then please ask your instructor. Thanks, and bye.